We can go through the sequence a lot. We can go through the intake a lot. We can just go through the mundane process. But until we figure out the small details of how this process actually works out and goes together, we're going to spend more time than we need to, right? We're going to spend more time chasing business rather than attracting. And I keep saying that, but the way you attract is you just build curiosity. And sometimes it just really means not giving too much information.
Connected to SalesRemastered.
When we do the initial intake call, whether it's an outbound or an inbound call, the second that we ask for their input, it controls the remainder of that call. Does that make sense? And so even if we do what we believe is protocol, like, hey, my name is Daniel, thank you very much for holding, how can I help you today? That's standard protocol. But unknowingly, that can actually set the tone of the engagement. And when I say set the tone, meaning that they're actually already setting up the momentum or the direction that you're going to go. And what happens when we ask that simple question is we actually lose control of the engagement, and then usually an objection will come about, which those objections would have been outlined. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. So we'll revisit on that another time, but I want you guys to follow me, at least with regards to the message, because ultimately when we make that first connection, again, whether it's an inbound or outbound, our main priority is actually to help solve a problem. And sometimes these prospects don't know what the problem is, and we as salesmen will offer to identify the problem. But what happens is when we offer to identify the problem, the prospect can become defensive, because we would say, hey, can I help you pay off any debt? Naturally, someone, especially a homeowner, someone responsible, someone who's actually qualified, they're going to be like, oh no, I'm okay, I got my debt. Do you guys agree? That's usually the response. But we could have chose a better timing to release that information. Because what happened is when we do it too prematurely, it actually puts an objection. But we sometimes are in the momentum of the day. And so we're focused on a lot of things, from the market, the leads, the quality, right? The processor, the file, the burnouts, there's so many things going on where we unknowingly, again, are trying to make time for these other activities that interrupt our own ability to continue generating, right? And so I guess the real punchline is that when you get into an engagement, when I say, like in some of my content, if you guys ever have watched it, when I say that you have to reset your mindset, what I'm talking about is you have to act as if they're the only person that exists. Because what happens is when you actually listen to that person, you can quickly identify whether or not you could take them to the next stage, right? And so if we were able to create some sort of system that enables us to identify within the first 2 minutes if I can even go forward with this person, it would not only help us avoid chasing, but we'll actually learn how to attract business. And so in this book, what I learned is that a narrow focus is better than a wide focus. Meaning a wide focus is like, hey, we're the number one lender in the country. People choose us because we do great service. That's kind of very wide and very vague, right? But if we allow our focus and our reason for that engagement to be a little bit more niche, something that's relevant and something that they're familiar with based on society, naturally they're going to be influenced to learn more. But not only that, you positioned yourself as authority because you're mentioning things that they've seen in the media. So unknowingly, you position yourself as an expert. And sometimes it's just as simple as changing your approach from, hey, my name is Daniel, I just want to see if you're in the market, to, hey, my name is Daniel, I'm sending over to your Gmail account right now this courtesy update having to do with the 2018 tax reform. I know, whether you use the information or not, it's completely up to you, but since you've contacted, or since we had contact with you before, or we helped you before, of course it's depending on the lead, right? So you have to have full focus. Sometimes you don't pick those things up, but when you build curiosity and you give the impression that it's on its way, it's very hard to turn down. More so, they'll put two things together. Number one is that you guys have talked to each other before. Number two is you got their email. And number three, this is not a sale. This is just a notification. Does that make sense? So their very first experience with you, whether they talked to you in the past or not, the very first experience is more of like, okay, cool, go ahead and send it over. It's actually good. It's not from a defensive standpoint. Does that make sense? Whereas if we called somebody and said, hey, my name is Daniel, we're doing a lot of business in Orange County, and I'm helping homeowners consolidate debt, right? So if I were a consumer and did not speak our language, I would hear, oh, well, that has nothing to do with me. I don't need to pay off my debt. I got a big tax refund coming, right? It's actually about positioning. So you may have heard the term like this is chess, not checkers. And chess is all about a game of actually thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. So in other words, if I go in this direction, then they're more than likely going to have qualms about this, right? So it's kind of doing the same thing, but when you open it up in a different way and you make it seem of something of value, meaning that, oh yeah, this 2018 report is super cool. You know, I see that you have kids. Sometimes you may know this information, right? Even if you didn't. Say, you know, if you have kids in the school district, it actually shows you the rating of that school district. It shows you where that school stands. Little do us homeowners know, but school districts play a big role with property value. And if you want to know what that house sold on the next street, it's actually going to have that information in this report. It's really cool. You got to check it out. Hey, while I got you on the phone, I noticed that, you know, and you're looking at the loans tab on that same report. This is a report you can get very fast, right? But see, sometimes we will choose to engage and then say, hey, or not even use that as kind of our bridge or foot in. Why I bring that up is because the main reason why we cannot complete the very first call, which leads to the pitch, which leads to the sale, right, is because of the very first initial objection, which is, oh, no, I'm not in the market, or what's your lowest rate? And that primarily is the reason, because when we hear this, naturally we want to respond. This is just human interaction, right? Like you ask something, I'm going to answer it. And so it's not necessarily our fault that we go in that direction. It's sometimes all we have to do is just reword our approach so we're not caught with that objection. Because when that objection becomes kind of like a roadblock, it determines where the focus is. And so if I allowed somebody to say, hey, what's your interest rate? Now I have to respond. Not only that, but I have to digest the information as it came, right? And so when I interpret the information, I think of the rate sheet. I think of the market. I think of the days of 3-point blah blah is no longer around, right? Remember those days? No closer, 3.5. Like, you know, and then so yeah. And so what happens is, like, if you've ever had experience where, you know, it's just it's almost resentful. There's a negative anchor to it. And so then we subconsciously become defensive because we just simply, you know what I mean? Like we have a lot of baggage that we're carrying too. It's like, fuck, I wish the market was better. Right? And so, but again, we have to pay attention. Well, what could I have done different so I didn't have to control, so that it didn't distract my energy and my focus? And so one of the main things is number one is, when does the objection happen, and what can we do to kind of eliminate that objection? And so the script, for those of you who have not, downloaded a copy of it, just email me and get a copy of it. Whether you use the words or not, it's really just the delivery. It's just the sentence. It's just saying, it's a very simple sentence, but I'm getting a lot of reviews saying, man, a lot of the resistance is gone now just from using the script. And sometimes when something of value is given out, it's not really noticed as valuable, right? Because you're just looking at it as like, oh, it's free script, blah, blah, blah. You don't really give it value because you're like, oh, I don't need a script. I got a script. But if you actually are open-minded to try different things, like right now I'm reading a book about marketing. I'm not in marketing, right? But I like the psychology of how marketing is sales, and marketing sales are together, the unison, right? When we telemarket, or when we outbound, or when we inbound, technically that's marketing, right? Because we're just marketing our services. We're trying to win that very first date. But when we get past into the 1003, this becomes our first date. But also we have to recognize that it's awkward in our first date. So everyone's on guard in a sense. Our prospects are on guard to not give us too much information. We're on guard to handle any objection that comes into play. So sometimes when we're thinking, like if you guys have been on a first date, and I would imagine you guys have, imagine how awkward it was at that very first time that you engaged with that person. You wanted to say the right things, you wanted to do everything perfect, but mind you, you weren't necessarily yourself. Right? You're the perfect version of yourself because you thought you're like on a job interview. But what happens is when you can tell when someone is in a job interview versus being themselves. And I've done a lot of job interviews. We probably have participated in job interviews. And you'll notice that you switch before you go in. Does that make sense? Where most salesmen do the same thing when they enter into a call. They'll do a switch, meaning that it's not about the actual purpose of the engagement. It's a switch to make a sale. And so unknowingly, we're with this closer mentality. Like, I gotta weed you out, right? Am I gonna sell you? Am I not? But there are plenty of times where we have probably completed an application where we thought we couldn't sell, and they ended up being one of our strongest clients. Not only that, but they became our cheerleader. They actually referred to us a bunch of business. It was just a matter of actually giving a little bit more time. But understand that much like when you're on a very first date, they're not going to show you all their cards. So we have to acknowledge this and just reword our delivery, right? And so instead of saying, hey, how many people have you slept with? What I would say, right? In other words, how many lenders have you talked to? What I would say is, when's the last time you had a conversation like this, right? It just gives me it's a different word to get the same exact answer, to get the same information that I need, but it's just worded differently. Whereas if I would have worded it, hey, how many times have you applied for a loan? Now I'm actually putting myself at risk, because then they're going to think, wait, I'm not applying for anything. Does that make sense? It's the words that actually push them away. And so that's why I think the trigger meeting that we had last time was very effective, is because a lot of times what we initially say is either going to push them away or it's going to attract them with more curiosity to our message. And so like those triggers, like, oh yeah, watch this, right? Or, oh yeah, I'm going to show you. Or, oh, hey, real quick, right? These are different hooks and kind of anchors to get them back. But now the question is, well, what do I say after that? Well, what you say is something that leads to a funnel question that allows you to expose them. But the key thing is, you can't be awkward on your first date and say, hey, how many people have you slept with, right? So you may have a different form of question, like, hey, when's the last time you looked at your credit score? This is another way of saying, when's the last time you pulled your credit? This also tells me how informed you are about credit. I worked for a lender, it was a subprime lender that we sold adjustable rates on. And these had 3-year prepayment penalties. There's a 2-year fixed, 3-year prepay. It was a MiraQuest. And we sold interest rates that were higher than your fixed rate. But our hook was that we can close in 7 days. We had cash out, unlimited, right? Stated income, no income assets, and things like that. And so that was our feature. But we didn't necessarily go in and say, hey, we don't need to verify income. We don't need to do that, blah, blah, blah. We can get you the cash out. We just got these really high rates. And so the question is, well, how did this lender, how were they able to sell someone so efficiently on such a risky product at a time where you could have got something so much safer on a 30-year fix? And I found that what they did was they teetered to the immediate results, meaning that they sold cash out. You can get cash out in a couple days, but Dale Vermillion, who was their sales trainer, he had this 8-video cassette set. There was no NMLS back then. You had 8 video cassettes, you're locked in a closet, and say, hey, when you're done, you're ready to hit the phone. I fortunately did this. I went through 8 video cassettes, I finished it in 2 days, I did straight. I ate in front of the TV, and the only thing that I kept hearing him say was, sell them on payment deferral, tax benefit, debt consolidation, and FICO. Right? So it was just immediate effect, but what it became is a message that steered you away from pricing. And so what happened was when we outbound called, we would get that objection too, right? Like, hey, what's your insurance? But the goal, but what they taught you to do was divert that question. So say, yeah, I'm gonna show you. Watch, check this out. Yeah, I'm gonna go and get that over to you. Let me confirm a few things. All it did was address it, but not really, right? And what happened was that the reason why this was effective is because it taught us how to extract more information. Because at the very first minute of the call, I cannot find out how much in debt they are unless they're really open, and putting themselves in a vulnerable state. Still stands true today that there are certain questions that you can ask within the first couple minutes that's going to set the tone. It's going to position you as a salesman, or you're going to position yourself as just a quick consultant. Like, I would prefer consultant because when you become a consultant, you're more of kind of a subject matter expert, right? That's it. And when you portray yourself as an educator, or when you position yourself as a subject matter expert, you're viewed at differently, right? I can ask a CPA or my doctor or an attorney a question as they are consultants, and be confident that I'm going to get some inside information that is not privy to everyone else. Does that make sense? This is kind of like the image that we need to give off. And so where I get back, the reason why I go into that subprime lending background is because I had a difficult time on selling those rates. I had a hard time. I worked with a national call center, so we did business, over the phone. We weren't inside the actual retail outlets like in Brea, Irvine. We didn't see our clients. And of course, selling a higher rate had its challenges, and to do it over the phone is even more gangster. But one of the things that I learned, and I made the simple switch, was that when I heard my area manager do a pitch over call. We were doing role playing. He had one of the LOs on the speakerphone, and we're all standing around him, right? And this guy was a legend. This guy was only maybe a year older than me, but he was young, but he was balling out of control because he was an area manager, so he managed the Brea, Santa Ana, the national branch, which was in Irvine, and so he was doing very good for himself. And I knew him from back in the day, but long story short is we reunited here at AmeriQuest, and he was giving us a pitch example over the phone. And the traditional pitch was like, hey, I got some information, grab your pen and paper, right? I learned this almost 15 years ago. But how he came in was from an educational standpoint. So he actually diverted the attention and piqued their interest first, got them in a point where they needed us. And how he did this was he started his conversation and said, hey, I'm actually looking at your credit report real quick, and I noticed a few comments. Experian is saying, balance of debt to max credit ratio is too high. You know what? I noticed that Equifax is saying the same thing too. As a matter of fact, I actually looked at these accounts to see if we can help you remove these comments, and it looks like that your credit cards are maxed out. It actually is true. And so I want to ask you, how much do you know about FICO scores, right? And so the whole attention gravitated towards what would happen if they didn't buy. And it wasn't, hey, you should buy because of this, you should buy because of that, but AmeriQuest became a large conglomerate, second to only countrywide, because they mastered the ability to actually sell fear. Simple and plain, right? And so when we come in a market where we're pivoting in a different direction, where the interest rates are actually moving up, and it's traditional norm to avoid high interest rates, right? Because everyone over the last couple of years were brainwashed to believe interest rates were going to stay low, and completely forget that interest rates not too long ago were 7.5%, 8.5%. That was just the norm. But the challenge is, though, is that it is harder to convince somebody, right, that something is different. But what we find ourselves in is a position where we just need to find out where the pain is and where the hurt is. And I think the reason why we are unable to find out those pieces of information is simply because of the roadblocks. It's the objections that happen, right? So if we pay attention to a lot of the engagements we have, pay attention to the engagements you had this week or today, and actually notate when you get hit with certain objections. Because if you get hit with an objection within the first 5 minutes, you're not controlling the conversation. More importantly, if you are not able to distinguish if that person even deserves the rest of your time within the first minute, you're not controlling the conversation. Does that make sense? So you might say, well, Daniel, how do I figure out if I can even move forward with this person in the first minute? It's very simple, actually. Number one is if you have the property profile, like I'll adapt it to the tools that we have right now. And I see the last time he refinanced was last year, and the loan amount is this, and the value is this. I quickly can confirm whether or not this guy's going to be a conventional or a government. Make sense? More importantly, I can move my declaration up right to the front, right? And my script is designed in a way where it does sound like a consolidated conversation. And so in other words, like, hey, before I move forward, let me just make sure I can even help you first. If I can, I'm going to show you what I can do. If I can't, I'm going to point you in the right direction. quick question. I know this is your primary residence, but are you in the midst of any bankruptcies, foreclosures, right? Now I'm moving right down to that direction. But then there are other signs that tell you that you probably you don't even need the declaration. Like if this guy's got a lot of equity. Last time he refinanced was 2015. This guy's not a refi whore. He doesn't necessarily need cash. He has good equity. And I can see from the trail that he went from government to a conventional. So I'm going to switch my strategy and be more or less like, hey, what's your goal with the savings? If I can improve your term, where would you put it? Back towards the mortgage or in the bank? And what that does is just a different way of saying, are you interested in cash out or are you just wanting a rate and term refinance? But the problem is when we traditionally ask that question, like, hey, are you interested in cash out? What we do is we put them on the defensive. Does that make sense? Because they're like, no, I don't want cash out. It's like you lost them. It's weird. They just react this way. And that's why I think that book, Invisible Influence, is pretty strong. It's crazy as fuck. Like just the information that it tells you about, it's insane. And this book was made about 15 years ago, and it still stands true today. So you're going to hear older brands, but you're going to see how they came up and how they actually dominated for a position. And all it was just understanding the laws of marketing, right? It's actually 22 imputable laws of marketing. Yeah, that I'm mixing them both up. If you guys are interested about that book, just send me over an email and I'll be more than happy to get you the information. But it's important that you understand these little nuances of your job because those little pieces are actually what help you complete your job, right? Because we could be moving a lot. We can go through the sequence a lot. We can go through the intake a lot. We can just go through the mundane process. But until we figure out the small details of how this process actually works out and goes together, we're going to spend more time than we need to, right? We're going to spend more time chasing business rather than attracting. And I keep saying that, but the way you attract is you just build curiosity. And sometimes it just really means not giving too much information. So if you've ever quoted or even pulled up BV or even given a rate range in today's market within the first conversation, that first conversation is 30 minutes. If you've done that, then you're not controlling the call. You have to accept that, right? Because what happens is when you give them a range or you give them an idea or you give them a summary or a sneak preview, they don't need you anymore. Because 99% of the time you're going to say the wrong number. Everyone thinks it's 2.99, but now's not the time. You're not positioned. They're not ready to go over the reason, well, what will happen if you don't refinance, right? Until we get that credit report, until we find out how much their net is, until we figure out what their plans are with the house, what their plans are with the savings, we can't pitch somebody, right? More importantly is that when we find out that they do have these needs, we shouldn't be structuring a loan until we at least confirm that they have the 4 pillars to make a loan. Do they even got the income? Do they got the credit? Because what happens when we get in this vulnerable state and we really need the numbers, we really need the business, we're crossing our fingers, we actually attract loan modifications. Because we'll get that hint of interest and a tonality of someone we're talking to and believe that, oh, I got this one, right? And sometimes not take the additional step just to look at their past inquiries and see that this guy's been pulling his credit multiple times for the last couple months. These are red flags. But these red flags protect us in our time, in terms of, well, how much time am I going to give you? And I think there's something about that. When you think about when you meet with a doctor or you meet with a contractor, CPA, or an attorney, you're on their time, right? You actually meet with them like, hey, what time can I? And they're actually giving you the impression if whether or not they'll take you. Think about that. It's crazy. There's a different tonality. I've never met with an attorney, never met with a CPA that tried to sell me. What they did do was tell me what would happen if I didn't have them. So now I valued their position. I was actually more scared not to have them in my corner. Make sense? Think about it. When you talk to an accountant, maybe it's a different accountant, and you're almost interviewing him, but he's a subject matter expert. So you need to know whether or not he's experienced enough to take the right corners to protect you from audit. Same thing with a contractor. A contractor, you don't know their language. They can come out and give you a bid on your kitchen. You have no idea if this guy is ripping you off, right? What his plans are, So there's a lot of things that we as consumers kind of put up as guard, but if that consultant came, or that contractor, which I've had 4 of them already, the one who won me was the one who came in looking at this like, all right, well, it played hard to get. I was like, all right, well, let me make sure, let me do something. Let me ask you a few questions first and see if I can even take this project on. Ooh, I wanted them bad. Like, well, what do you mean you can't take my project on? What the fuck's wrong with my project, right? So, right, that's attracting. Whereas this contractor could have came in and said, okay, well, I'm looking about maybe $35,000, $50,000 before I even go through the details of the house. But this guy did it right. He said, he came in my house and he was like, all right, yeah, we're doing a lot of business in this area. You know, I'm pretty slammed. I don't know if I can start the project for 3 or 6 months. There might be an opening. So give me a hint, like, ooh, there might be an opening, right? Made it exclusive. And then what he did masterfully was he actually walked us through the design and said, okay, well, what do you plan on doing here? Do you see it? Can you envision it? He kept making us see it and experience it. Oh, okay, so then this will be your table, this will be where your sink goes, and this is going to be where the stove set goes. Got it. And will you guys be in here? And he had us experience it. And then he delivered and said, okay, let me crunch some numbers real quick. I'm gonna make a call to my guys to see if I could possibly fit you in the spot. We didn't even make a decision yet. But he took the authority, right? And then came back and like, all right, so we're not sure if we can get the spot in. Here, let me cover the numbers with you first. And then went over the numbers and said, for the ideal one that you want, it's gonna be this. But if you want something basic, generic, just make it look clean, I can do it for this low amount. Now we just wanted the premium. Not only that, but I wanted this fucker to start tomorrow. Like I was ready, you know, because I experienced it, I wanted it. There's just something different about that delivery. Whereas the other 3 contractors came in and they're just more about price. They're just more about, well, you know, what's your budget? That was their first question. Well, how much are you looking to spend? What? Right? You're putting me on a defensive state already. I'm like, okay, well, my budget was $3,000. What up? Right? Now it's just some outrageous number just because I want to play with them. But see, if we said that, then the contractor could come off defensive, right? And then steer that engagement in a completely different way. Instead of build the anticipation, build almost the exclusivity.